So when one door closes, they say another door opens. So in 1990, I had a son, and my son was diagnosed with autism. So I was a former elementary school teacher, and I could not go back to teaching because I had to juggle the demands of raising a son with special needs and a career. So my father gave me a big wave and he says, come work with me. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, I know nothing about what you do, only the stories that you told me. And he said, be yourself, you'll learn as you go. And that's what I did. So I went from teacher to contractor. And I started working with my father in 1996, predominantly as a marketing representative. And from there, I went on into 2008 when my father retired. This is my son, Christian. And the path was then to make a decision of who was going to run the second generation of my father's and our family business. And my father stepped down and I assumed the role as president. So in 1996, I was juggling a lot of things. And then 2008 comes along and my father passes the baton. And I said, you know what, Dad, I love what you do, but we're using chemicals and I am vehemently opposed to doing so. So we decided that if I was going to do this endeavor, that I was going to go green. And now we use a botanical based product and we've been using it since 2008, which is safe, it's effective, and it doesn't put people, the planet, pets at harm. So we reinvent the family business. We decide to go green. And now we're, for essentially for many, many years competing with national franchises.
When Jeff was prepping us for what we should say tonight, he said we should answer the question of how did you rise to your current role in the region's building and realty industry? So my short answer to that is by showing up for 30 years. It really all began when I became a co-op shareholder. Soon thereafter, I was invited to run for my co-op's board and began attending CCAC dinners with my fellow board member and mentor, Herb Rose. Herb, as Jeff said, was on the CCAC board at the time and recommended me for a position. After a few years on the board, I became an officer of the CCAC, which also gave me a seat on the BRI Board of Trustees. Now, becoming a trustee was an interesting experience. I was the second woman to become a trustee at a time when most were builders. They were a traditional bunch who shared a long-time camaraderie. They were neither interested in co-ops nor in women as colleagues. They largely ignored me, although there were a few friends like Mike Marcus and Carl DeMeo who did make me feel welcome. I soon realized that the builders were about a decade behind the rest of the business world in accepting women. So it was an unexpected rerun of the process I had already experienced in my personal professional life as one of the first wave of female MBAs. It was a matter of patience and persistence.
As a young child, he always brought me to the office. He always brought me to jobs. I remember there was one job that he brought me to where the foundation was done, the first floor was done, and there was a board going across the entire townhouse, which he had me walk across with him. It was a bounds beam about 12, 15 feet up in the air. In the 8th grade, I sold one of the townhouses that he built to one of my teachers. I didn't know I was doing it at the time until he came home and handed me $250, which in the mid 80s was quite a bit of money. And my teacher bought a townhouse on Lisa Court. Later on, when I was in college, I was in the business school and I was majoring in finance. I just didn't know exactly where I wanted to go with my major and how I wanted to drill it down. And my father encouraged me to major in real estate finance, which as soon as I did, everything clicked. And it was something that I really excelled at. working with him on a day-to-day basis always worked out my brain. It was when he was around, it was like being on a treadmill that was going a little bit faster than you can actually do. And at the end of the day, I just always found that he challenged me, but I was exhausted. He always had an office staff of only female employees. I don't think I really paid much attention to it until recently, but we always had female staff in the office. That was it. I still have two brothers. I have two brothers. But at the end of the day, it was me that my father mentored and me that my father decided to pass the business along to. So in DeRosa Builders, there was no glass ceiling.
I loved it. I always loved school. But when I was graduating, the question was, what should I do? Right now, I could have gone and gotten a job in the city, but I really didn't want to commute. I still had 3 young children, and I didn't want to do that whole commuting business. Ken had given that up, so it didn't seem like a good idea for me to do that. On the other hand, although there were many law firms in White Plains, most of them were the competition. So that wasn't such a great idea. And Ken had said he could no longer run the practice on his own, and he'd be happy if I joined him. So that's how I became an attorney in White Plains. At the same time, he was doing work with John DeRosa. So you can see there's a long history. And there's no question that John DeRosa influenced Ken Finger professionally and as a person, and mentored him from the outside. I mean, he wasn't an attorney, and Ken certainly and I did not need somebody to mentor us as an attorney, but certainly how to run a practice in terms of dealing with buildings, owners of buildings, and the complex issues, which is what I'd like to sort of get into in the real estate industry. Now that's a big word, real estate, but it's real estate. It's co-ops and condos. It's contracts. It's ETPA. It's the area of discrimination these days. The prevailing wage issues that are the construction industry is heavily involved in dealing with now. So the number of issues when you say building and realty go almost across the board of all kinds of business law. There's not one small area. And so we have had to have, it's a big challenge to stay up on so many facets of the practice, but we work hard on it. And fortunately, our 2 sons, as most of you know, joined the practice. They did not join out of law school. It was very important for us, for them to learn on somebody else's time and to be able to bring something to us, which is what they did.
I did not wake up one day and say, I want to own or run an excavation or a construction company. I grew up in a very traditional home. My dad worked 9 to 5. Nobody owned their own business. Dinner was at 6, and we had, a brother and a sister, lived on Long Island, and that was my life. My mom was probably my biggest mentor, not knowing it. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's at a very young age, and she was a fighter. So she was diagnosed with Parkinson's at 40. And so she always taught me and my sister from a very young age to be self-sufficient, don't need anybody. And my mom didn't even work, but she taught us as if she was a very strong working mom. That is how she raised us, even though she would not get up with us in the morning to help us to get ready for school. But somehow she instilled these values in us that were so important to my sister and myself and my brother. But obviously it's a little bit different for women. So I went on to college and I majored in food and business, and I was always thrust into a position above my, probably my comfort level. I don't know why. It started with my first job right out of college. I was promoted over somebody that should have gotten that job as the food service director. And just because, and I was there about a month out of college, and this other person was there for years and should have gotten that position, but for some reason didn't. And I had to, he said, you're gonna sink or swim, kid. And from that time on, I just said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm either going to sink or I'm going to swim. And I swam. And I went a very successful food service career. I worked for Bear Stearns. I worked for Aramark, but I was assistant food service director at Goldman Sachs and the food service director at Bear Stearns. And in between, long story short, I met my husband, who I married to, who had owned it was evolving into an excavation company. And I really didn't like my job anymore. And fast forward, I quit my job. Very, very, very successful job. I always think about what I would be doing right now if I kept that job and how much money I'd be making. But I left it because I wanted to help him, because he was having some struggles, and we went on to have 3 boys. And I've always been around males. That's kind of how I was very set up somehow in my life. All my food service business, my children, always been around males. So I just always had to kind of, navigate my way around that. But I appreciate women in construction, women in business, but we're people. And like Lisa said, it's the qualified person that is going to do the job. But I decided I was always very involved in, management and leadership was just something I was good at. So you can truly translate that to any industry or any business. I am convinced of that. You do not have to be the most proficient person operating a piece of equipment to run the business. And I've argued that point over and over and over and over again. And I have finally gotten to that point where people don't care if I can't run that piece of equipment. And I'll tell you if I can't, but they know that I'm gonna be able to operate and run the business. And that's what the most important thing is.